Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome to another lecture, very important lecture. Do you know what are we talking about these days? Yes, we are talking about different stages of an oral lesson. Alright, so in the last lecture, remember, we talked about practice stage, very important stage. So what did we do in that stage? I hope you know it, because you practice a lot. Alright, so in the practice stage, what we do? We practice speaking that language. We practice writing that language item that is presented in the presentation stage. So being a teacher of language, what we do in practice stage, let's see in the review lecture that we had. So we talked about the rationale behind this present practice stage is that what we do, we make student in fact practice that language item in a controlled environment. What happens? Environment is there, students work in group or they work in a pair, and that really what happens? Yes, they practice and the teacher is there to help them out. Yes, I understand that the teachers at times they find it hard, that definitely of course there is a class of 15 students, the class of 20 students, and you see that, well, I mean, how a teacher can monitor each and every group or each and every pair, if there is a pair work or if there is a group work. So what he can do, that simply he can provide them a model, or the teacher can give them a handout, so they keep on working. If every students have a same handout, or every group may have a different handout, so once the teacher visits that group, of course that handout can help the students, and also that handout can help the teacher. So in this way, for example, if there's a class of 50 minutes is there, so if the teacher gives, for example, 10 minutes to presentation and then remaining, for example, 20 minutes for the practice stage, so yeah, every group may have 5 minutes each, or every group may have 4 minutes each. So that's really in fact important, because the practice stage is the stage that motivates the students, and of course this stage practice motivates the teacher. Why? Because the teacher feels that whatever he presented, it is there in front of him, and the student feel that whatever was presented in the first stage, now they are able to use it, and whatever learning is there, if you are able to speak that, means you are a good learner, you are a successful learner. So we discussed that traditionally the stage, that is practice stage, was of course teacher-led drills were there, but now we are in the age where we talk about communicative language techniques. CLT is there, so in this way there is a communication among the group members, right, and also teacher can help. And we also talked about the difference between a drill and activity, and we saw that drill is more conducted by a teacher, drill is cued by a teacher, and then activity. What happens in activity? In activity, my dear students, what happens in activity? Yes, the students in fact what they do, right, in an activity students perform, they sit together and they work on that, of course, assigned project. So my dear student, this is what we call it, a difference between an activity and a drill. And then we also saw that what are the drills. Fine. In drills we saw what is a meaningful drill and what is a mechanical drill, and we saw that a mechanical drill is the one in which, well, a specific form of the language is taught, right, and I mean particular form, and the teacher in fact uses that, teacher speaks it, and he expects reply from the students in chorus. Whereas in a meaningful drill what happens, that a different situation is given and the teacher expects variety of expressions. So that is what, if you compare the meaningful with the mechanical drill, so students feel, teachers say that this meaningful drill is even better than mechanical drill. Why? Because meaningful drill helps students give innovative expressions. Meaningful drills helps students reply positively. Meaningful drills help students reply, give favorable replies and all that. So this is what you see, my dear students, it happens in a meaningful drill. And then we saw, of course, what are the practice stage procedure. So we discussed that, of course, there is a control. The control of the teacher is there. Students control, in fact, students are controlled by the teacher, and they practice, right, under the guideline, under the instructions, of course, under the umbrella of the instructor. And the stages, of course, definitely there is a shift from teacher to the student, because the teacher's role was in the presentation stage, and in the practice stage there was what? Students. So there was, of course, shift changes from teacher to student. Now today, the next stage, of course, production stage. Very simple, right? So when I say production stage, my dear students, you might be thinking it's something to produce, right? You might be thinking about the productive skills, right? So like you speak or you write. So here is a stage that whatever was presented by the teacher in the first stage, that is presentation stage, and again that was practice in the second stage, that was practice stage, and now it's a time to produce. So we call it production stage. So this stage, in fact, does what? Yes, it gives, in fact, time. It's a time for the students to produce. They practice, and it's a time to perform. It's a time for the driver, that learner driver, to ride, to drive on his own, right? So drive, of course, earlier the instructor gives him directions what to do and what not to do, and he corrects him. But now it's the time that he wants that learner driver to drive independently. So that is what we call it production stage. So, but we'll be talking about the role of production stage, talking about the activities, what are different types of activities, and then we'll see the value of the production stage, right? So these three things we'll talk about: the role of production stage, values of activities, and what? Value of the production stages here. So dear students, what is the role of the production stage? You see, now my dear students, so now it's a time for the learner to perform independently, right? Because definitely when you teach language and the learner learn language, so we don't teach language to them for a specific situation, and even learner do not practice that for the classroom practice. No, they learn it. They learn language because they have to communicate in that language. They have to talk with their bosses. They have to manage their day-to-day activities. So that's why independence is important. So in the presentations in this production stage that we are talking about, what happens? The learner, in fact, takes the control. The learner comes on the driving seat. That's why it is time for the learner to perform independently. And what happens? So we refer back to that learner driver an analogy of the presentation stage. Once the learner has been shown how to do certain tasks and he has been performed certain tasks, now it's a time for the learner driver to try on his own, consolidate his experience and learning, and even correct his own mistakes. Right? So whatever he was presented by his instructor, whatever he was helped out in the practice stage, so he practiced in the presence of his teacher, his instructor, or the teacher if you're a student. So now this is a time that you have to produce, right? If you have a driver, you are an entrepreneur, you are of course a bus driver, whoever, right? You are a student, you are, of course, you learned about, in fact, present tense, past tense, or the future tense. So this is the time that you have to use. If the teacher has presented, if the teacher, has talked about past tense, so now it's a time that you need to make sentences with the past tense. So that is, of course, the role of the teacher. Then what happens in the role of the teacher, of course, that is, the first part is experimentation. So in this production stage, what happened, that students experiment. And what is experiment? Performing things, right? So this again analogy helps us to realize that the full learning does not take place until learner becomes free of their teacher and do things for themselves and by themselves. right? I mean, if a person depends on somebody that he would direct him and he would correct, so it means that it means he is not dependent. So we have to make learner dependent, and in this production stage we practice for it, right? We help the learners to be independent learner, because learner has to face different situations, right? Learner has to face the bus stop. Learner has to face the travel agent. Learner has to face different situations. So that's why, of course, if the learner is independent, right, so that learning will be more, of course, faster, more useful. So even here, that is what we talk about, that experimentation is important. So learner becomes free of their teacher and they do things for themselves and by themselves. Once they do things, again, they maybe, of course, it is not hard and fast that in the experimentation phase, while experimenting, learner would do well. Definitely he would be in trouble at times. His experience would definitely teach him. So that is what we talking see in the talking about the role of the production stage is what? Experimentation stage. So one of the aim of this production stage is to give learner an opportunity to experiment on their own and to allow them to see how much they have really understood and learned of the language that has been practiced under controlled condition. This is again, this is the output of the practice stage, that whatever they were presented and they practiced. For example, the teacher talked about negative sentences of past indefinite tense. So the teacher presented, of course, and then the student practiced in the presence of the teacher. And now it's a time that when the teacher asks students, what did you do yesterday? Right? And now if the student practiced well in the practice stage, they would say, well, they in fact attended a seminar yesterday, right? So again the teacher asked, why didn't you attend the class? So the teacher student can reply, I was on leave, right? I was on leave because I had to attend that workshop. So why didn't you intimate me? The student can reply, well, I intimated the program coordinator and he knew that I would be on leave, right? So the presentation stage, there was the past tense, and again it's negative, and of course that is when we make a negative of past tense, what we do that we after this negative word we change the past form into base form. So once students have practiced, and now if they produce that I did not intimate you or did not tell you, it means that, well, the practice stage was fine. It means that the production stage was also okay. So they may mistakes, right? The students may make mistakes, but the learner driver, they will try to correct any mistakes that prevent. Of course, when you learn driving and when you start learning driving on your own, initially maybe sometime you violate a signal, and it happens. You never know. And maybe in fact, and of course, maybe you see somebody, in fact, once you violate a signal and then you are nabbed on the next signal by the traffic police, and he might give you challan, he might give you a ticket. So that maybe that experience would teach you that you need not jump the signal. So that is an experience. Or sometimes, of course, you overtake from the wrong side instead of overtaking from the right side in Pakistan. If you overtake from the left side, so again, you see, it's a violation. So that's why, in a way, of course, when the learner, in fact, when the student starts speaking the language, and you see it in the production stage, yeah, at times initially he might say, you must work hard, right? So again, after saying it, he would say, oh no, because modal verb, and modal verbs requires the base form. So then he would say, oh, you must work hard. You should have done it. Or he might say, you should have do it. Clear? So, like generally, of course, many people say, you works, in fact, and say, oh no, you work, right? So that's what, of course, with the passage of time, what happens, that, see, the learner learns from his own mistakes, learn from his experience, and of course, this production stage is really important stage. So experimentation stage is a phase of this production, of this role of the production stage, where learner experiments and he learns. Then of course, in the role of production stage, feedback is also important, right? So what is feedback? Learners need feedback on their learning. Of course, if the learner does well, yes, definitely his group members can appreciate him, the teacher can appreciate him. So that feedback, in fact, of course, again motivates the learner that he is doing well. And if of course the feedback is valid, and if the learner is not fluent and the feedback comes that you need to be more fluent, or if the learner has some problems, so if the teacher gives them feedback that you need to work on your fluency, you need to work on your pronunciation, you need to work on your basic structures, so that really helps the learner. And the teacher needs feedback on their teaching, right? The learner, if he's learning well, yes, so the teacher can give him feedback, his group members can give feedback that, well, you speak well, right? Or you have a problem, you cannot face audience, or you shy and all that. Whereas the teacher teaches, and of course the learners, the students can give him feedback that, well, this is the stage that you do well, and this is the stage where you need to improve. And that's why, of course, in these days in every university there is an evaluation performer. At the end of a course, what happens? That evaluation performer is circulated, and the students definitely, what they do, they work on that, they work on that professionally. So dear students, this is one that we do, that we, of course, in the production stage, feedback is required. Both the learner needs feedback and also teacher needs feedback. Teacher requires feedback for their excellent teaching or for their poor teaching, right? So therefore, in the production stage, yes, feedback is required on both sides. If the students do well, encourage them. If they are unable to do well, yes, you can find out the problems and tell them these are the areas you need to work on. If the teachers do not give the students a free rein, they can never know how much the students have really learned. Is that clear? They only, when the teachers are given, when the teachers give free hand to the students, they come to know that how much they have learned, right? And that is important in the production stage, that let the student produce, right? And if the teacher corrects him with every sentence, and again, that is of course mean that students cannot learn in that environment. So dear students, feedback is again very important in the role of production stage. Then again, what integrating new language with old. In the production stage, it is a stage we talked about that, well, where students produce, right, whatever they have practiced. So again, another point is that integration of the new language item with the old one, right? This is also the third aim of this stage, to give learners an opportunity to integrate the newly learned language into the previously learned language in an unpredictable linguistic context on both the receptive and productive levels. For example, you talked about second conditional, you talked about if you worked hard, you would qualify. Now, here, this is the second condition, right? People also call it improbable condition. So, while teaching this, yes, the teacher needs to integrate that, well, in the first condition, we talk if you work hard, you will qualify, where it is most probable, right? So, and then second condition, of course, it may not be probable. Well, if you worked hard, you would pass, things are not clear. And then again, if you move on to the third condition, had you worked hard, you would have passed. See, so that's why again the teacher in the production stage, well, that the role of the production stage is to integrate, because they perform well, they produce well if they can link the previous knowledge with the item that was taught, right, in this lesson, right? So once they produce, it doesn't mean that they only produce whatever is taught in this lesson plan, right? So for this condition, my dear students, what we do, that in the production stage also incorporates the students the knowledge that they have gained from other means. Is that clear, students? So therefore, the role of the production stage is also to integrate the assumed knowledge of the student with the newly learned, of course, language item, newly learned language. That if today a new word, of course, students have learned, and then they need to know that what was the other word that they learned in the last class. So that's why you see in the production stage does what? That in this stage integrates what? Integrates this present, right, language item with the previous one. It's important. The process of learning can be compared with learning how to drive again. You see that, of course, what happens that when you learn, you see, when you start driving, and definitely whatever you have learned yesterday, that how to take a right turn and how to take a left turn, or whenever you see when you move, you have to take a U-turn. You know, for example, when your instructor teaches you how to take a U-turn, right? So definitely your knowledge of changing your lane would help you. In fact, if you have to take a U-turn, so you need to be on your extreme line, right? And if you're on extreme left and you want to take a U-turn on your right side, so that it means you are violating lanes. It means there is a middle line and there is a left line, of course. So for that you have to be there. So naturally speaking, if you have to take a U-turn, you need to be on your line, right? So that's why your changing of line, that knowledge would help you in learning how to take a U-turn. So that's why in the production stage, what we do, my dear students, we try to link, try to integrate the previous knowledge with this newly learned language item. See, and that analogy still works. That learner driver, of course, learns first how to change gear, and then, if you say the driver accelerates first and then he changes gear, right? There's one way, of course. Generally, of course, if the speed is high, then you, of course, change the gear. If the gear is low and speed is high, or if the speed is high, right? Could be the speed is high and gear is low, or the gear is high and speed is low. Again, there is imbalance, right? So that's why, of course, when you need to know that for a specific speed, you need to decide that which gear is required. For speed 40 and above, should I be in the second gear, or speed 60 and above, should I be in third gear? So it varies. Is that clear? And initially you find it hard, but slowly and gradually you adjust it yourself. All right. So again, motivation is very important, my dear students, right? Motivation is a stage in the role of production stage, because it is a time that students produce, they talk, they speak, right? So their sincere motivation, in fact, helps them produce well. If there is no motivation, student might not be able to perform well. So motivation, in fact, my dear students, help the learner to speak that language well. So motivation works. And learning a foreign language is a source of motivation for the learner. Good motivation paves ground. Good more motivation encourages students. Good motivation, in fact, makes things easy for, and the poor motivation, or there is no motivation, helps no motivation, of course, puts student learners on the back foot, and they cannot perform well, right? Even a student is not performing well, and if the teacher asks him, yes, good, keep on doing, we are doing well, so that compliments again, teacher, of course, would help the students. Some students, they come and they shy and they cannot say even a sentence in the production stage. So here, the teacher's role, of course, is important, that how he handles the situations. If he scores that teacher, that what have you been doing in the previous stages, then of course maybe the next stage that student would not come. So here, of course, the teacher, in fact, he becomes a mentor, and he helps the student to say even 2 sentences or 3 sentences, whatever have been practiced. So again, the question is that why, some students cannot produce well in the production stage. So we have to go back to the presentation stage, whatever the problem in the presentation stage, and we need to find out the weaknesses in the presentation stage and also in the practice stage, right? So production stage, it's the output stage, right? It is the output what you have practiced, right, or it was a controlled practice, and then we go back to the presentation stage. So dear students, in the production stage, the failure of production stage again goes back to the presentation stage and the practice stage. Success of presentation stage, yes, is linked with the practice and the presentation stage. So that's why the motivation is very important. Teacher can work as a catalyst for the learning. It's very important, right? Catalyst, you know, is a chemical that does not take part in the reaction, but it speeds up the reaction. So is the case that, of course, when the student tries to speak, tries to say something, the teacher in fact encourages him. Teacher works as a catalyst. He just helps him out. Please say something. Good, good, good. Teacher forgets his mistakes at this moment of time. The teacher wants the student to utter some sentences, and he keeps on encouraging, of course, and you see, and he asks others to encourage the student, and that really helps, of course, for the language learning. Because for the language learning, in fact, though motivation is important for all other learnings, but for language learning, it's not easy to learn a language, particularly a foreign language. So you see, you need to motivate, and that motivation should be sincere motivation. Well, students, we were talking about the role of the production stage, and we talk about motivation. You know, motivation is important, and we discussed that, you see, teacher works as a catalyst, right? And if the teacher fails to motivate, the learner would not be able to learn that language. So again, another role of this production stage is that creating the right condition. It is very important that, of course, a teacher, right, this stage, particularly the production stage we're talking about, creates the right conditions for what? See, for the production. No doubt the production stage gives priority to the experimentation, creative language use, spontaneity, motivation, confidence building, and fluency, right? Definitely this is what we do, because once you produce, you try to be, of course, you try to bring innovations, you try to be spontaneous, right? That's what we do. And then to achieve all these things, the teacher has to do a lot, right? The teacher has to create right environment. Fine? Only then a student can be spontaneous, only then student can be motivated, only then student can experiment, and he would think of new language items. Well, students, so teacher has to play an important role in this case. What teacher can do, he can in fact help students participate. And of course, another important thing is that the most suitable participation pattern for the production stage are pair work, group work, and mingles as they chance to everyone, right? So production stage, again, we discussed that is output of the previous stage, and the role of course, the teacher is important for spontaneity, right? In this stage, for what? For the spontaneous overflow of the thoughts, right? And for what? For bringing change in the language that has been practiced or that has been presented in the previous stages. So teacher's role is very important as far as production stage is concerned, because the teacher creates the right environment. You know, without having right environment, without having right situation, without having right place, right time, right, learners cannot produce, right? Even, of course, this creating right environment means that, you see, sometimes it happens that in a class of a language learning, there are some students who just laugh at others, right? So here the teachers, in fact, has to fix the problems. He has to maneuver the ways that he has to make everybody understand that well it's a production stage, and the students are trying to produce, and everybody needs to help others, right? And that efforts, of course, on the behalf of the teacher and other students as well, right? And we understand that, of course, learning a language, yes, it's a difficult task. We cannot learn it unless you put efforts, unless others motivate you, unless others encourage you. So its encouragement should come from your student side and also from the teacher side, and that's why, of course, participation, I mean, the teacher helps students in their pair work, in their group work. And again, if you go back to the practice stage, with the practice stage, I mean, the work that you do, the efforts that you put in the practice stage would definitely help you in the production stage. So dear students, these are what mean the role of the production stage we talked about. Now what are the activities, the types of activities in the production stage? Very simple. They could be role plays, right? Discourse chains, they could be discussion, they could be communication gap activities, they could be games, all that. These are the activity. Role play, I mean, we'll be talking about role plays. In fact, you see, you act as a clerk, you act as an travel agent, you become a doctor, you become a professor, right? And there is a role play between a professor and a student, a role play between a teacher and a student, a role play between between a travel agent and a customer, or a role play between what? Where the students, in fact, I mean the two students, they stand up, one of them acts as a driver, another acts as what? Of course, a passenger. So this is all discourse chain. I invite you to come to my home, and you refuse or you accept, and of course if you refuse, you give me reasons, and I invite you again for the next day. And so that would be fine, that would be nice, right? So discourse chain, when you invite, your invitation may be rejected or it may be accepted. Fine, students? That is what this could be. I mean, activity, that is, we call it discourse chains. Or we have what? Discussions, right? And discussion can be, in fact, in a group, discussions can be done, or overall, teacher can raise an issue and student can discuss that, student can give its pros and cons. So discussion is done, my dear students. This another activity can be done in the production stage. So what? First one, role plays, again, because, and whatever you see, that item this teacher wants students to produce in that role play, obviously that has been practiced in the practice stage, and of course that was given in the presentation stage or discussion. How to discuss things, in fact, how students in fact motivate others, how teachers in fact particularly motivate their students for discussions. And then again, communication gap activities are there, right? Maybe one student knows more than the other does. So in this way there can be an activity, there can be a dialogue between somebody who knows more and somebody who knows less. So it can be a communication gap activities can be done, or different games can be there, right? Market game, of course, different games can be created, right, for this production stage. So important point for this stage, my dear students, the teacher constructs these activities in such a way that they promote communication and yet ensure that the new language occurs unprompted, naturally and frequently in the context of previously learnt language. And role plays, questionnaires and games, alright, fine, are not necessarily the production stage activities, fine. And if I mean, there are some books, of course, there are some videos that can help you, of course, right? And again, that these activities that of course are designed, right, for example, in the production stage, that they are role plays or they are discourse chains or they are the games or the communication game activities, fine. If they work, or if you feel that they are taken from some source, you can use them. If not, you can design, of course, things can be done. So if you move on to these types of activities, my dear students, the difference between a practice stage and a production stage, of course, is very important, right? So what is the difference, right? See? So my dear students, the difference between a practice stage and a production stage, it's very important. So what happens in the practice stage, that of course students are provided, right, a new language game, right? Whereas in production stage they are expected to create a new language game. So that is, of course, the difference. That well, in the practice stage, students are given a structure. In the production stage, they are expected to use that given structure to form different, of course, utterances or different language, of course, chains, right? That is what we see the difference between a practice stage and a production stage. Let's see with an example here that there is a student, he is a passenger, and then of course there is that he wants to go somewhere, and he asks that person, of course, that Karachi to, for example, Rawalpindi, find out traveling to Lahore and Rawalpindi, you see, and note down information you receive so you don't forget. I mean, you can call a person, in fact, you can call a railway station, right, and you get information. Excuse me, what time is the next train to, example, Karachi, right, or Lahore, fine. How much is the single fare? How long does it take? Right, students? So here of course, that was first, you see, I mean, you are a passenger, and you see, you call railway station, and then you ask, right, you ask some question, what time is the next train to, and of course, how much is the single fare, and how long does it take? And then of course, type of activities in the production stage, what is it, students? I mean, maybe S2 is a station clerk, right? Student 1 is a passenger, student 2 is a officer there. So the Karachi to instructions, answer the questions the passenger asks you by finding the information in this chart. For example, time, fare, length of journey, right? So I mean, what is the next time? Which is the next time to, which is the next train to Lahore, right? So it is, for example, you can say it is Pakistan Express, or then question again, what time is it, right? So what time does this Pakistan Express leave Rawalpindi for Lahore? You can say, I mean, 1800 hours. What is the fare? 1000. Length of journey 6 hours. Similarly, Rawalpindi and all that. So this is what again we see that an activity that can be, of course, there is a discourse between a clerk and a passenger. Passenger asks question and clerk replies. Here is, of course, and this can be done in of course, if you talk about the clerk and the passenger, a role play can be managed on it, that in the front of the class, one student becomes in fact a railway ticket agent, and the second becomes a passenger, and then you see there is on the board what we can do, we can write the fare, we can write different name of the train, timing of the train, and the railway stations, and the length of the journey, and you can of course, the student 2 can ask questions and student 1 can reply. Or there can be a discourse chain, like we see here, of course, there is a man, the clerk, see, greet and ask what about time of a train, 2x, right, and clerk replies, right, hello, assalamu alaikum, may I know the timings for the next train to Lahore? Yes, sure, why not? See, how much is the fare? Yes, it's 1,000 rupees. How long does it take? It takes 8 hours. Thanks, and say goodbye. Say goodbye. This is what, again, a discourse chain between a man and a clerk. So in a class, of course, in the production stage, you see, when there is language item that you have presented in the first stage, so it can be practiced through this way, through a discourse chain, right? So in this discourse chain, what happens? The question comes from the person, from the passenger, right? And then he inquires, he asks for, some information, and then what happens? The reply comes, right? That, hello, assalamu alaikum, fine, I'm the customer, I want to travel I want to go to Lahore or Karachi. Could you tell me the train to timings for Lahore? Sure, why not? Right, our first train leaves at 9 in the morning, 7 the next. Okay, then how much for the single fare? See, this can be a discourse change. And of course, my dear students, the third point is we talk about first that what is the role of production, and then we talked about, in fact, what you see, the types of activities in the production stage. We talk about role plays, discourse chains, right, and then of course discussions and all that. What is the value of production stage? Why it is important? If I ask you, students, can you answer the question? Okay, it's important because it helps you produce language. Okay, good. What else? It gives you confidence, right? It tells you that you can speak. Okay, good. My dear students, production stage is important. In fact, it's very valuable stage, because student might find it hard initially to execute the activities discussed in production stage. Initially, necessarily, of course, it's fine. It's difficult for the student to act a role play or to have a discourse chain in the class. But if you do it regularly, you see, the student gain confidence, and you see they enjoy doing it. So initially, they would be difficult for them, but with perseverance, with continuity, everyone in the class will become used to these activities and see value of these activities. Is that clear? So initially, you may find some of the problems with the students, that they might not come forward, right? But after some times, they would volunteer for these role plays, and they would enjoy it, and then language learning would be fun, right? And this is the fun, of course. In this environment, of course, learning would be faster. Another point is, students will much appreciate class success and expression in the new language. Of course, because acting, learning language through acting, or learning language through discussions, or learning language through question answers. Yes, it is a day-to-day activity that students do. So, and this stage, they don't get bored, right? Because activities are there, right? And of course, activities are performed by the students, right? And while performing these activities, yes, they think of, right, the new language items, right, and they keep on bringing creative ideas, right? So therefore, the production stage is very valuable stage, because this is the stage that in fact helps the students to act, or you to discuss, or you speak, in fact. So that is, of course, very valuable stage. Now, students, if you see the summary of this production stage, and today, of course, we have completed these stages of this our lesson, that we started with presentation stage, and the practice stage, and of course production stage. So in this stage, the role of the production stage is time for the learner to perform independently. Here it is independent learning. Yes, students. So independent learning, my dear students, is really important, because unless there is a learner is independent, it would be difficult for him to learn, right? Because a driver, very natural thing, again, we go back to driver, a learner-driver in an analogy, my dear student, that when many a times you have seen that, of course, if a learner, right, I know many people, of course, they in fact hired a driver for them, and they could not become independent driver as long as the instructor remained with them. So after 15 days and after 1 month, those people, of course, who had some basic skills, and they start learning on their own, so they became good drivers after 15 days, after 1 month, right? So this independence is very important. So is the case for this language learning. So is the case that once you start producing language, you start talking in that language. So obviously, you see what happens, that you try to you become independent, and you make mistakes, of course, and no problem. You see, once you make mistakes, definitely you learn, in fact. So if you go back to this production stage, that is independent learning is there, and this is definitely an output stage, and the input is what? Practice stage, and that is presentation stage. So what we do in this stage, that experimentation, students experiment with the language item that they have learned, and they keep on experimenting it, and in this experiment they keep on refining, they keep on improving the problems. If they don't experiment, then of course they won't be able to refine their discourse, they want to improve their discourse. So this experimentation phase is very important, and the learning, of course, is faster. They learn faster, they learn better if they produce. So this aim of production stage is to give learners an opportunity to experiment on their own, and to allow them to see how much they have really understood and learned the language that has been practiced under controlled conditions, right? So here it's time that whatever they have done in the practice stage, it's a time that they use it, in fact. And you know, the purpose of the language is communication, and of course you cannot expect that there should be a person with you always whenever you talk and he would correct you. No, that has been done in the practice stage, and now it's a time to produce that, right? And if you speak that, yes, fine, it helps you. In fact, that production stage really helps you, right? Because now here you become independent, and there is an independence. If you see, I mean, in the first presentation stage, of course, that the teacher was there, in fact, and the students were depending on the presentation stage. In the practice stage, we saw that, of course, the independence was less, because now the teacher has done the job. Now it's students, they have to practice. Teacher just monitors them. Now it's a time that again the teacher is there, but students, what they do? They now produce, right? So independent learning there. Independence really important, because this is what we need. We have to communicate that language in the of course on our own in the independent environment. So that really works. Then of course, my dear students, what you have, that you have to teachers, they have to create in the production stage. What we do? Create right conditions, create good environment, fine. And to achieve this, teacher has to do a lot. Particular participation, of course, patterns, and the most suitable pattern for the production are work, group work, and of course mingling with the students, which is very important, right? So that's why the right environment, because it's very important. Good environment is very important for the production stage. If students are provided this right environment, when there is no stress on them, there is no pressure on them, and there are no physical barriers around, so yes, obviously they can produce well, right? And then again, of course, the activities we saw in this production stage, we talk about role plays. Yes, I mean that you play different roles, because in life you have different roles. In life you are a father, you are a mother, you are a teacher, you are a student. So is the case, and if you learn language by playing these roles, that works, right? So different roles can be there, my dear students. When you play different roles, so you learn it well. Then of course discourse chains are there, right? Discourse chain mean when you discuss things, right? In a discourse chain, you ask a question and a reply comes. Then you ask a question, and then of course dialogue is seen, and there is a discourse moves on. So discourse chain can be an activity. Discussions on different topics can be done, of course, in the production stage, or communication gap activities can be there. Different games can be designed, if you can design your own games, or there are lots of books which have these different games are there. So dear students, I mean definitely fun learning. When you have games, you can use some games, and you can definitely, I mean, exploit these games. Can be taken from different sources, or these games can be designed if you are a creative person. So definitely a language teacher should be creative, because he needs to create activities, and he of course needs to design different games for the learning. It's important. So dear students, if you see this production stage, today we have completed these stages of the oral lesson. And if I recap all these the stages, we talk about presentation stage, we talk about practice stage, and we talk about production stage. Even in some books you might find this warm-up stage. What stage? Warm-up stage is, of course, that we call it motivational stage, that before presenting, what you do, you create environment, you see, you prepare students' mind for that lesson. So production, before the presentation stage, there is a stage we call it warm-up stage, where you prepare minds for that language item that you are going to teach. Presentation stage, the name shows what you present, what you teach to the students, in fact, and how you teach. Again, it depends, right? You use some, multimedia, you use board, or use some charts or whatever, and then again which activities you use to present that item. Of course, presentation stage is important. And why it is important? Because this is the first stage, and other two stages, they depend on the presentation stage. A good presentation stage, are very well designed, very well thought out, and very well planned presentation stage, of course, helps students in the practice stage and also help them in the production stage. So for the mean, we need to know what is presentation stage, right? And the purpose of presentation stage is also important. Then we move on to the practice stage. In the last lecture we talked about the practice stage, where students practice in a controlled environment. Of course, the teacher is there, right? He in fact helps them out, right? The teacher in fact, though it is not easy for a teacher to help each and every group, but still he tries, right, to visit each pair, of course, and for that we discussed that, I mean, the board can be used, I mean, handouts can be used, so that teacher would be easily in fact manage that the practice stage. And practice stage of course gives confidence. Practice stage removes weaknesses of the students, and the practice stage motivates the students and also the teacher. Then after the practice stage we move on to the production stage. This is a time where the output is come. This is a time when the students in fact have some role play. This is a time when the students have some activities. This is a time when students have some discussions, right? So this is a time that whatever you taught, right, whatever you wanted to teach in the presentation stage, and if you feel that students are able to produce that, it means that that lesson plan was a real success. And if you taught in the best way, and you can expect that your production will be fine, and that is output, right? So presentation is, of course, you present, and for that presentation definitely you need to do work. You need to have a proper lesson plan so that your presentation would improve, right? And of course, for presenting things, you need to take everybody on board. For presentation, you need to use important realia, important aids, and then again the practice stage, of course. And in the practice stage, you make everybody the practice, and once you do that, then we move on to the production stage. So in production stage, what happens? Yes, the student produce, they speak in fact. This example you talked about, yes, you see, and you had better work hard in the presentation stage, and the student practiced that to different activities, and finally if the student is able to use that structure, you had better work hard, it means that he knows that, well, you had better work hard when we use, it's sort of warning as well. So dear students, yes, this is what, that there is a link, these three stages are linked, right? Presentation, practice, and production. And before that there's a stage that prepares the mind, and we may call it warm-up stage, right? So all these stages are important, my dear students, as far as oral teaching is concerned, right? If you keep in mind, and of course if you schedule these these different stages, some people in fact, when teachers, what happens, that they cannot manage their time. They may give more time to the presentation stage, and ultimately they have less time for the practice stage. And of course, once the practice stage suffers, obviously your production stage suffers. So all these stages are important. All these stages are given due importance, right? That's why your time management is very important. The teacher's time management is important. That if you have got 40 minutes class, then he needs to decide how much time should be there for the presentation, how much time it should be there for the practice and for the production stage. So you need to be a very good time manager. Is that clear, students? Good time management skills really help you, right? And if you manage your time, if you prepare well, so you will be excellent teachers, in fact. So dear students, this is what we talked about in these lectures, talking about oral lessons and language teaching. Mind you, we are talking, in fact, we are practicing how to be good language teachers, and we are talking about different, of course, stages in a lesson. And all stages are important, right? Either there's presentation stage or practice stage, and of course production stage. Now if you have any question, you can ask a question. Okay, you want to know the difference between a practice and a production stage. Okay, all right, good question. My dear student, the practice stage is the stage where students practice in the presence of the teacher, right? In a controlled environment, students practice. Whereas the production stage is there, different activities can be designed for the students to produce that, right? Even the name shows that when you produce means whatever you have learned, it's a time to speak that. Okay. Then again, of course, that maybe in the practice stage, you give language items to the students. In the production stage, you want them, you help them out to create new language items. So this is again a difference between what the presentation and the production stage. Any other question do you have? Okay, why these stages are important for a lesson plan? Okay, student, it's a good question. Yeah, why? Because this presentation stage, if you have these three stages, the benefit is that you can overcome this muddled, right? If you are not clear when to teach, and you are not clear when to give chance to students for practice, and if you are not clear when it's a time for the students to speak, so you would be in trouble, you would be confused being teacher, and the learner would also be confused. So to remove this confusion, what you do, that of course experts of language, teaching, they have bifurcated, in fact, they have divided these stages into 3-1. That is, even they say there is a warm-up stage also important, and after that there is a presentation stage, and there is what? A practice stage, and of course production stage. If you know these stages, you will be able to manage things, you'll be able to manage your lecture well. Otherwise, you might be in a deep sea. Good. Any other question that you have? Okay. How to make a lesson plan? Well, okay, a good question, but we'll be talking about lesson plan in our coming lectures. All right. Any other question that you have? I talked about micro teaching. Okay, well, students, yes, I talk about micro teaching. The micro teaching is, of course, at the micro level. Of course, when you teach a specific language item in a lesson plan, how you teach a specific class is a micro. Macro mean when you see overall curriculum, overall syllabus, that is macro teaching. Micro mean when what you do, that you keep, of course, one aspect of that teaching. So that is what we call it micro teaching, in fact. Okay, any other question? Can we differentiate between presentation, practice, and production stage? Okay, again a good question. Well, presentation, if you want to know it, simple, remember that presentation is what to present, what to show to the students, what to teach the students. And the practice is what is being practiced, being used, right? And there is an I. Of course, the teacher is there and he keeps on seeing you, of course. And then we have a production stage where you practice, where you speak. So with this, students, it's time to say goodbye to all of you. See you in the next class. Till then, Allah Hafiz.